We at Microsoft, I was lucky enough that we have a history of community as a source of marketing and business development. But that community was always in the developer arena, not consumer.
Yep.
So when I took the idea to our executives and sort of pitched it as an idea, it was new but not totally foreign. The challenge and the amount of time that it'll take to actually sell one of these type of programs through your executives. Because you want to be a good steward for your company. Whether it's as large as Microsoft or as small as a startup, you're a steward of that company. Mm-hmm. And that money has an opportunity cost to it. If you don't do this, you'll do something else. So it took several months for me of making my case just to myself before I made it to the executives and said, is this the right thing to do? I went through a lot of data, I read a lot of books, and it was almost like really being in grad school again when I was in business school and would take a project for a quarter, and I looked at it as a project and said, I have to make a case by the end of this quarter to take to my executives or professors as to why they should spend X amount of money on this. And that's completely how I approached it. I read books and I looked at data and Forrester reports and created a presentation that I took to executives. I got feedback, and obviously we went through a couple of revs on that. And then in the end, when I got so I'll give you a time frame. That started in July, and I think I got the funding like right around Christmas or New Year's, I want to say.
So this all started for me back in July, when two things happened. One, Marty came to me and with this great idea to create a place where Windows Live users can come and talk about how they're using Windows Live and get inspired with how other people are doing with Windows Live. And at the same time, I just started working with the FTP project, and we were talking about how do we help users get inspired and get support with Windows all up. And so luckily those two happened at the same time, and I remember going back to Marty and saying, love the idea, but two requirements. One, you can't go build a separate one-off platform. It has to be built off of the Windows Live platform. And two, we must build it in a way that we can start with Windows Live, but eventually we get to this being a community for all Windows users. And I was really happy recently when I learned that we are going to be going to that step 2 and expanding to all Windows users in the very near future.
I think that socializing was a big thing. Doing my homework was a big thing. Being really rooted in the data. And when I say the data, so that's an interesting thing to think about too. There isn't a lot of data around right now about social media and community. Not in the sense of if you look at email, returns or even digital, media buying. There's a lot of data around that. When I say data, what I really looked at was engagement marketing. What does engagement marketing do for you? And there is data around the value of engagement marketing and how that brand can have it can resonate longer with your customers. It has a longer value life chain. So that was mostly the data that I sold up and said, if this is engagement marketing, this is what we can get long term. I talked about how we could grow it, in stages, incremental stages. There was a timeline, a roadmap of we'll start small, we'll get bigger, we'll be able to adjust along the way. Learn and adjust, which is a big thing here at Microsoft.
So, so at the end of the day, this wasn't a small investment for us to make. And so when we think about what were the key drivers to kind of get us over the hurdle of the business case, for me it was fundamentally looking at what kind of engagement we could have with the work that we do. And so from the marketing standpoint, it was really looking at when people see these stories that are coming from customers, do they react to them differently or more positively than maybe a way that we might talk about it. And then when we actually get into looking at just the site itself, how much time do they spend looking at a piece of content we might create versus something that came out of the community. So really we looked at it as kind of the action we saw in the marketing we create and the actual engagement we saw on the actual content that was created. And on both of those measures, the community content's been, again, ahead of our wildest expectations.
Socialized it a lot. I would encourage people to socialize it a lot with there's a lot of groups here at Microsoft, so if you're in even a relatively small to medium-sized company, it might not quite be as challenging, but in a larger company, we have different marketing groups, we have product groups, we have customer support groups. So socializing it, I think, was a real benefit because when it did sort of finally evolve and become real, there wasn't anybody that kind of say, well, why'd you do that? Hadn't heard you were doing that.
Well, there was, I think, some trepidation within the FTP community, because it was the very early days of FTP, that it was, we were talking about Windows, and this idea seemed to be all about Windows Live. And I think it took a lot of convincing and kind of explaining to people that, we have over 400 million Windows Live users, and that's the place to start, to build a community, build a capability, prove it. But eventually, we would, of course, in step 2, expand it to be for all Windows users. But there was a mental bit, I think, in a lot of people's minds that just it was Windows, or it was just Windows Live. They didn't want to do just Windows Live things. And so once we crossed that chasm, though, I think people started embracing it.